Alright, let's hope this is brief. We're going to try and get set up here to finally get to the war. So we talked a little bit about how the Japanese people responded to the Depression, arguing that it was Western influence, decadent Western influence, that needed to be ended. So they went all the way over as the pendulum swung fully to the conservative side and tried to recreate their historic past. One of the things that will take place is that their government will be basically a fascist type government. Although it has the emperor, he really doesn't have a whole lot of direct power. As you see there, it's ruled by the emperor, but really run by his ministers, and his ministers turn it into in essence, a fascist regime. This leads, of course, to the alliance, ultimately, of all three fascist nations, the Germans, the Italians, and the reason the Germans definitely wanted to ally themselves with the Japanese was to put two enemies one on either side of the Russians, who, as you're probably aware of, Hitler will eventually attack because communism was something he definitely disliked. But they will be allied to the Japanese. Now, how does this lead to the U.S. getting involved in World War II and the Japanese attacking the U.S.? Well, the reality is that the Japanese began to try and expand, as a fascist regime will, and of course the Japanese expand with one eye on just taking territory and the other eye on trying to get resources, because they are two small islands, or they are a set of small islands, and their natural resources are very limited, especially if they want to expand and be militaristic. They're going to have to find resources elsewhere. So in 1930 they actually begin the invasion of Manchuria, or part of China. And when they begin this, we immediately decry it and talk and say that it needs to stop. Remember, it was actually during this period of time that the Philippines turned down the possibility of becoming an independent nation because they worried about Japanese expansion. But throughout the 30s, the United States let the Japanese know in no uncertain terms that we were unhappy with their behavior. However, we continued to supply them with things. They got scrap iron from us, and most importantly, they got oil from us as the two major things that they needed from us in order to expand. Now, their expansion will continue, and as we look at the map here, I'm going to move forward. The area you see here in red is the area that they'll ultimately expand to after Pearl Harbor, but as they do so, they form what they called the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere, and this was their politically spun argument that it was better for them to dominate these areas rather than anybody that was from a European-based nation. In other words, we're Asians, it's better for you to be controlled by us. Of course, if you're not familiar with the brutality with which the Japanese took over places and killed people, you should just consider it to be just as brutal as what the Germans did, although without a massive Holocaust the way the Germans pushed it forward. So it was the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere was really just a sham in reality. But the Japanese will want to expand, and they will take over different areas. And so we'll see that the Pearl Harbor attack, and we'll get a couple of points here and then go to another video, but beginning in the January of 1941. Now, this is after the U.S. had called up its draft, but and really wasn't that worried about Japan. We knew that they could be a threat, but the truth is most people, and Roosevelt, in fact, through the entire war, believed that Germany was a much greater threat. The Japanese were a small nation that had limited technology, although they were very well organized, as we'll find out, and very well drilled, and did all kinds of things that were very amazing. Really, it was a small nation attacking a very large and powerful one, and so we weren't that worried about them, although we knew it could be a possibility. But what really sort of sets up Pearl Harbor taking place when it does is that as the Japanese continue to expand, Roosevelt in January of 1941 told them that if you continue to do these things, then we're going to cut off your supplies. For one thing, we were beginning to supply the British, and we were looking very hard at exactly how we would do all of that. But it was in June of 1941 that the United States actually cut off its supplies of oil, and that was a key component, as well as scrap iron, to the Japanese. And many historians today look at this as basically starting a time clock. And the time clock was based on the fact that the Japanese had about 6 months of oil left, and if they were going to continue to try and expand, they were going to have to get some new form of oil or something in order to make it happen, or do what the United States had hoped, which is back down and leave the places they'd taken, and then the U.S. would resume oil sales to them again. But this time clock really begins in June, and of course it's not just coincidental then, as people look back on it, that it's in December of 1941 that the Japanese do attack at Pearl Harbor. And we'll pick up with the attack and what the attack was all about and its impact with the next video.